Go, Brent.
Let's vote. Let's get out the 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 vote. Let's win. All right, let's get to work.
That's enough, Brent. The reason you actually missed the first few seconds of that, because at the beginning of that clip, everybody was chanting Kamala, 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 like that, and she just decided to interrupt. So maybe play it again, and then we'll kick off the podcast.
Okay, here we go, everyone.
Let's vote. Let's get out the vote.
Yeah, see, they're all shouting Kamala, Kamala. You know, and it's just a very awkward moment. And it was kind of, the awkward moment was kind of summarized last night for the U.S. election, wasn't it? So
most definitely. I just want to thank everyone for tuning in today to PWD Allies podcast. This is a special edition today. My name is Brent Frain. I'm the host, and we're talking about the results of the U.S. presidential election. Donald J. Trump has won a second term. That's right, second term in the USA. And Canada is their direct ally. There's a huge trading partner with the U.S. And so the implications that are going to happen one way or another with Canada. Who knows what's going to happen with tariffs and all that stuff. And then we're speaking about that, the implications.
Yeah.
There's a sound clip that I want to play.
We're all about the audiovisual today.
Yes. And I'm just going to play a little clip here that I have from our Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland. So she's going to just get a little clip here of what she has to say about migrants coming into Canada.
About border security. Border security for Canada, yeah.
Yeah, so here we go. Here.
Ms. J.D. Vance has said it.
Okay, here we are, everyone. Listen up.
Donald Trump has promised mass deportations. J.D. Vance has said it would be reasonable to expect that they could deport 1 million people a year. Is the federal government planning there will be a surge of migrants crossing from the U.S. into Canada?
Thanks for the question, Mackenzie. And again, what Americans choose to do, what America's incoming elected administration chooses to do in the United States is a decision for Americans and American leaders. The decision for Canadians and what's important for Canadians is to control our own border. And that is something that's really important. It's fundamental. And I do want to assure Canadians that we absolutely recognize the importance of border security and of controlling our own border, of controlling who comes into Canada and who doesn't. And we will do that.
The RCMP has said that folks
we will do that.
See, with a Trump win, more people crossing. And just to ask again, is there a plan in place, or are you expecting that more people will be crossing from the U.S. to come to Canada to avoid being deported?
What I am expecting is that Canadians expect us to control our border. Canadians quite rightly believe that it needs to be a decision of Canada and Canadians who comes to our country and who doesn't. And that is something that we absolutely have a plan to ensure.
Yeah.
Have a plan to ensure.
Another good soundbite, but you don't necessarily believe it, right?
Well, I'm quite concerned with, a million migrants in a year coming into Canada. And right now, we already have a huge housing crisis going on to provide housing for our own citizens here. There's nothing wrong with, migrants coming in, because, Canada has always been known to have a lot of immigration coming into Canada. Even since I was a kid, but that many people coming in, we just can't provide all the resources and housing for massive amount of people coming into Canada. Yeah. So I agree with with the deputy minister on that. About tightening the border security to a point. Having so many coming in, but not massive amounts. That's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, but the other part of it too is, obviously, Canada didn't care when they totally relaxed immigration during COVID. It just got stupid, right? But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, the reason why we're doing this podcast today, it seems kind of, we're two Canadian guys, right?
Yeah.
And what do we know about American politics? Maybe nothing. But the reason why I really wanted to do a podcast today is number one, I actually reached out to Aaron Richmond before we decided to do a show today. And Aaron Richmond, he's great. He's got his own podcast on Aaron's Opinion. You can look him up on our own playlist. Because he has come on the podcast here a couple of times. Great guy. Yeah. He's a great guy. I love his podcast too. But he's an American, and he's very opinionated. So I thought, why not have him on the show and have an American's perspective on kind of what happened last night. And I just want to say that he says I'm always really excited to come on your podcast. He says it's nothing to do about that. But he said, he did make a clear point and say, he's always very willing to share his opinion because he's very opinionated. He's not shy about sharing his opinion. In fact, he said, I am a Trump supporter and I'm very proud to be a Trump supporter and all that. But he did say that the reason why he didn't want to come on is that he doesn't want to kind of stir up division or or because he says after what happened last night, the country is divided, right? And everybody there's always this thing that everybody says is never talk about American politics, because even American politics ends up really dividing families even. Maybe a little bit here too, but not as much. And maybe part of the reason why is because they have a two-party system only, and here in Canada we have 3 and 4 and 5 parties, sometimes. So of course you're going to get that 50-50 split, and and people are kind of surprised, but honestly, I am not surprised, and we can get into that. As to why I'm not surprised, but I just wanted to say that the reason why Aaron didn't want to come on is, like I said, he's part of the blind community and he's very protective of that blind community. And I think, you have a sight impairment yourself, and maybe you can speak to this or not, is that in some ways, if you're blind or deaf, I think there's an extra layer of almost discrimination if you're blind or deaf, right? It's like a disability times 2. If you it's another layer that doesn't get appreciated, I think. And so I don't want to put words in Aaron's mouth, but I think when I've spoken to him before, it's like he's very protective of the the blind community, and there's, like I said, like politics are very divisive, and he doesn't want to be, stir up that division, and I appreciate that, and I can understand that. And I mean, but having said that, it's not that he's not comfortable coming on the podcast. He's just not comfortable coming on the podcast right now, because he's quite willing to share his opinion. And in fact, he said, like, I could openly share his thoughts.
Yeah.
I could be his conduit here on today's podcast, and kind of share what we talked about. But he said just right now he wants to wait until maybe after Trump has been inaugurated, and then everything's kind of calmed down, and then he won't feel responsible for causing more division in the disabled community. So that's kind of why he didn't want to come on today.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And with that being said, Neil, it's like what goes on in Canada it's like the same. Like, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's like having a guest on saying, well, why would you have? Now I'll just randomly pick a name out here. So why would you have Pierre Poilievre come on, Brent, versus Justin Trudeau? Like, I'm a Justin Trudeau supporter. I'm not a Pierre Poilievre, or vice versa. And so I understand kind of what's happening on that angle. Or in BC, in British Columbia, it's like saying, well, why would you have John Rustad come on, or I'm a David Eby supporter. I mean, vice versa, or like certain guests, like is it just NDP, or is it just the BC Conservatives, or is it BC Greens? Right now, we only have the three here in BC. Because the BC Liberal Party, Kevin Falcon, the leader, he had folded the tent, and unfortunately, everyone lost their jobs out of there. But that's all political, right? But it comes down to the deviceness. It's like PWD against PWD. Well, you choose market housing. Well, why don't you want supportive housing or subsidized housing, where you can pay cheaper rent? Oh, you want to pay higher market rent, right? So it's that divide. But when it comes down to the of having Aaron on, I'm looking forward to the opportunity of when Aaron does come on, because listening to Aaron's opinion, I love his viewpoints. But I'm glad that you mentioned about like sight impairment or visual impairment, like blind or visually impaired. As a person who is sight impaired, I'm not fully blind myself. When I was born, all I could see was shadows. I used to walk into walls, thinking there was a door. I could see a door, and I was like double vision for a while, and it was scary. I have like just memories of that happening, and I didn't know. I was confused. I didn't know what was happening. I had corrective surgery done. It didn't correct my condition. It just corrected my pupils so that I would see straight, rather than it being all over the place. It still left me with my condition, which is uncurable. But that's just who I am. It's my life, what I know. I wouldn't know anything different. And I kind of talked about that part in the podcast before. But it's something that I navigate with throughout my life, and having other people share their perspectives on that, who are sight impaired, because there's so many different eye conditions out there. Oh my gosh. And with mine, it's unfortunately, scientists haven't found a cure for it. I remember going to an optometrist one time, and then I went to an ophthalmologist. They claimed that they knew my eye condition. Oh, well, we could just do laser surgery on you, Brent, and we'll give you 20/20 vision. Like, that's not going to cure my eye condition, which it wouldn't. I never agreed to it. So I walked out of the office. But hearing people's concerns regarding like political decisions that are made by policymakers, and regardless of what country it is, it has a huge impact on the person's well-being as a person with disabilities, simply because it's all regulations, right? It's the regulations that are designed, that are made and it's the policy that's kind of like the lid on top of the regulations. Well, these are the policies we're doing. We need to see these regulations modernized and into actual results that are going to better a person's well-being going forward. And I worry with the U.S. election of the implications of the huge tariffs that Mr. Trump wants to put in on Canada. I don't know the impact it's going to have, but I've heard that anywhere from 10 to 20% tariffs on our softwood lumber. And so in British Columbia, so what I'm very concerned about is the cost of lumber is going to go up. Like, we ship it down to the U.S. for processing. Our lumber, our trees, they process it and then they ship it up to us. Now, if they tack on, imagine 20% tariffs on that. I mean, our cost of housing is, I mean, we're already in a housing crisis. We're going to be in a state of emergency because of the housing costs. And nowhere to rent for $500 right now, not even a whole check. So it's going to get pretty terrible.
And I just wanted to argue a bit the other side for a moment, Brent. I mean, we're actually going to agree for the most part, but let me argue a little bit the other side. Again, the big reason why I wanted to have today's podcast is, like, one of the biggest reasons is to show the parallel between what happened last night in the States versus what happened, just a week ago or so in BC here. I mean, there's a lot of parallels, really. There's a lot of parallels, and I wanted to get into that. I mean, we can start by saying that, and again, we talked about it on previous podcasts, but I wanted to start by saying, David Eby ran a very negative campaign. It was kind of like he didn't want to really talk about his own record. It was all about smearing. It was all about smearing John Rustad and saying how bad John Rustad is. It wasn't about look what we're doing. We're doing all this great stuff. It was like, you better not vote for Rustad. It was very fear mongering, right? And it kind of bugs me that so much of politics is fear mongering. Now I'm not saying that the tariffs won't happen. I'm going to steer clear, because they might, but it just bothers me though when so much of an election is like, don't vote for that guy because that guy is just bad and evil.
Right.
One of the things that Aaron did say to me, like, we were just he likes to use voice recordings. Like you and I do the same thing. You send messages, and he does the same thing through WhatsApp. He just so we were just trading voice recordings back and forth and having a conversation in voice recording, and I'm gonna lose my train of thought here. Actually, sorry. I hate that when it happens. My brain gets too far ahead of myself. Shit. Oh man.
It happens. Maybe
no
worries.
Just keep going then.
Yeah.
I'll
No, it's like the parallels when it comes to voting for such and such a person, saying, well, vote for me because I have your best interest.
Yeah.
Well, the other one says, well, the economy's suffering. People are hurting. They're struggling. They can't put food on the table. But the other one says, yeah, but vote for me because I'll make it better because the other one made it too expensive for everybody.
Yeah.
Oh, but don't vote for the other party, the other one, because you vote for them, it's going to take a vote away from us, and it's going to go over to the other party. Well, telling people who to vote for.
Yeah.
Right?
Now I remember what I was going to say is, when Aaron said that he voted for Trump and he was proudly voting for Trump, is we have to remember that the United States is very much more conservative country on the whole than Canada, not so much, right? But the United States for sure is a very Christian-centered country still. so that they have a lot of very conservative ideals, and you know, I know Aaron counts himself among that. He's Christian and conservative that way, and so that is one of the reasons why he voted for Trump. But the other thing too is, like, he says point blank, he says, like, I know that Trump is a idiot and a jerk and a convicted felon. He says, I know all that. And he said, like, again, we were just trading recordings back and forth. He says, I know all that. And but he says, like, and he says, I would rather have a much better option to vote for, because he says, like, I know that Trump is a jerk and an idiot and all the rest of it, but he says, in comparison to Kamala Harris, he says, you know, Trump is still the better option. And so what does that say? What does that say when somebody says, you know, when you compare two bad options and Trump is still the better option? I mean, again, we can draw parallels to the BC election that we just had. Same thing. I mean, I think
it was razor thin, eh? It was really.
I think Eby thought he was gonna walk away with it, walk away with the election like last time, without realizing, you know what, the electoral people, they're smart, and you know, people. I think people in Canada today, or even in the States, are going to say, like, what's wrong with the American people? They're idiots. Well, the fact of the matter is they're not idiots. You know, people vote the way they're going to vote for a reason, because they really did think that Trump was the far better option, obviously, right? And so you can't say that people are idiots for voting for Trump, or for example, people are idiots for voting for Rustad. Again, people voted for Rustad for a very good reason, because they didn't like what Eby was doing, you know? And
well, I mean, people were so, like, priced out, right? And so, like, well, the administration, like, I'll refer to BC just for instance. So when the administration was in, people were hurting, they're suffering. They've seen the cost of living go skyrocketing through the roof. I mean, high rents. I mean, it doesn't matter who I talk to in my community where I am, and people are saying, like, do you know where there's a place to rent that's you know, fairly reasonable or cheap? I'm like, cheap? There's nowhere cheap. You know, so when it comes down to affordability, I mean, that's just there. You go to the grocery store, where you used to be able to buy for $100, you're getting maybe $30 or $40 maybe worth of groceries now, if you're lucky. And you have to really look at the sale items and buy things that are on sale. And so the affordability, or you go to the clothing store, you try to buy, you know, clothing that used to be fairly reasonable. Now the prices are even higher and higher. So everything's gone up in price. I don't see the prices coming back down at all. I mean, on those goods and services. But of course, now we got a port strike too. So now that's going to exacerbate things too on our west coast of British Columbia. Day number 2 now. So with the U.S. election going now concluded, now we know who the president's going to be. Economically, I mean, we've got to protect the jobs and the industries in Canada the best way we can. And work together as partners, as allies, and you know, work with the U.S. How Canada needs to do this to strengthen the economies back and forth. And I guess the key word I always use on the podcast is governments to work together. Work together, find a solution that works good for both you know, both countries. And I mean, that kind of goes with the province. The same thing is that the electorate, they decided when it came to our provincial election, it was a razor thin election. Again, I had a crystal ball, and I thought, I wonder if it's going to be really close again. Sure enough, I was right. I didn't realize it was going to be that close. Yeah. But the electorate, they basically said, this is what we want to see. We want to see change happen. They want to see things more affordable. But with so much taxes and fees and everything, basically just compiled on everybody, the cost of living, people are stretched beyond their means. I mean, way beyond their means, you know, their household.
Yeah. And you know what, Brent, the affordability question is a good segue into what I'm going to introduce now, and they actually are related. I'm going to show how they're related. The cost of living and affordability, how it's related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those two things are so closely tied, and I'll get to the reason why, and how, again, this is a really clear parallel between what happened last night in the States and what happened in BC. It's exactly the same thing. I'm gonna share my very blunt opinion, is that, I think BC NDP likes to pretend that they're very progressive, and I mean they get kind of tagged as the activist party, right? Activist and progressive, and it's like, yes, we support diversity, equity, and inclusion, but diversity, equity, and inclusion sounds good on paper. Like, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Like, on paper, it's a good thing. But when you pervert it, and I'll get to that in a second, when you pervert what diversity and equity and inclusion actually are, and you're actually not doing it, even though you say you are, it's very hypocritical. And I'll get to what I mean, but just by one example, for example, is like you were saying, rents. So that's a classic example. Like, again, the BC NDP is very fond of saying, like, yes, we want, like, during the election campaign, for example, like Eby was like, we must fight against hatred and racism and like equality is the, he's like hitting all the right notes on diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's great. But at the same time, like, you have to realize from a disabled person's perspective, like, when you're basically setting the shelter rate at $500 a month, and you're saying $500 a month is enough for shelter for people with disabilities.
Oh, I know, it's ridiculous.
That is
beyond.
You're basically, I mean, the provincial government every month is basically gaslighting tens of thousands of people with disability by basically saying, yeah, you can afford $500 a month. Like, and they know it's impossible, but they're basically gaslighting and say, yeah, it is possible when they know it's not. And so, when you say that you support diversity, equity, and inclusion, and yet you have a policy like that where you're deliberately, like I said, selling pink unicorns up the yin yang.
They're like the one behind
right? You. I mean, it's just very disingenuous and very hypocritical and very gaslighting. It's not diversity, equity, inclusion. It's the exact opposite of that.
Well, what's frustrating, again, it's like going back into like being before the election. It goes basically one of the comments I had mentioned on the podcast, and it was a talk show, and I had phoned in, and David Eby, the premier, was willing to take phone calls on a local radio station talk show. And when I had called in, and again, like, the question wasn't coming from me, it was coming from my manager, my landlord, was asked, well, okay, so we gave you a rent increase, Brent, annually. Every tenant in British Columbia, in general, gets a rent increase. I mean, if their landlord chooses not to give a rent increase, I mean, I guess that's up to them. But most landlords do give a rent increase every year, like, based on what the annual percentage is. And again, in 2024, the annual rent increase in British Columbia is 3.5%. So I got a rent increase, but in our provincial budget in British Columbia, Neil, there was nothing in the budget for PWD, for persons with disabilities. So my manager was kind of questioning that, saying, well, okay, so I gave you an increase. Why didn't the government give you an increase and, like, tie it to inflation? At least tie it to inflation, so that automatically you're going to get a rent increase. At least that's going to cover the majority of the increase that we gave you. What are you going to do? I said, I'll just have to take it out of food, or I'll have to cut back on some of the basic toiletries. So then that's what I had to do. And so again, I have to think, well, in 2025, are they going to give us an increase? Well, what I'm hearing in the platform from David Eby is that wait until July of 2025,
Yeah.
and we're going to wait on the Canada Disability Benefit that is completely, it's completely bungled up so bad
Yeah.
that majority of PWD in Canada are not going to get it. There's so much red tape involved. So with the government relying on the federal government to do the right thing, I mean, folks, listening to the podcast right now, just a little refresher if you're wondering what the CDB is. It's a Canada Disability Benefit that was promised 4.5 years ago by the federal government to lift people out of legislative poverty in Canada. And so the amount that was actually recommended at the time was $2,000. And that was when CERB was out, right, in 2020. Now we're in 2024, and it's still not even there. We're going to wait till 2025 to give people up to $200 a month. So it's like a sliding scale. You look at the scale on the one side, 2,000. That was in 2020. Imagine $200, but it's based on household income.
Yeah.
And that's a gut.
And this is what I don't like. I don't like the the blame game of
that's what I mean.
Of like where the province, BC can just say, well, it's the Fed's fault that they're not supporting you. I mean, let's face the facts. It actually is the provinces that have the file. I mean, the provinces have the file to support people with disabilities. So they are not, like, the province of BC is not holding it up at its end of the bargain.
Yeah. It's the residents who live in that province. We live in Canada, but we live in the province that we live in. It's like in the U.S. A disabled person will live in they'll live in the state of California. Yeah, they live in the United States, but they live in the state of California. They live in a county within the California. Like, so it's like in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, etc. And so where PWD, where they'll live in that province where the government says, oh, but we're waiting on the federal government. Well, I'm glad you mentioned it, Neil, because it's that jurisdictional again. It's like it's like kick the can down the road. Let's hope that the feds are going to fix something. And
that's why I always talk about pink unicorns all the time. I mean, again, if we want to draw a parallel, we can draw lots of parallels. And this is why we're doing the podcast today, to show the parallels. Yes. It's like with the American election, there was I forget where I saw that. I think it was maybe a poll that was on CNN or something. I'm not really sure where I saw it. It was somewhere online, and it was a couple of days before the election, before the vote of the American election, and the question was asked is like who do you trust to fix the economy and the affordability problem, and it was like Kamala Harris or Trump, and it was overwhelmingly Trump. Like, it was like 85% was Trump. Wow! Like we trust Trump to solve the affordability. It was something stupid like that. Like over 80%. But then there was a question too, and this is kind of funny. Is like, who do you trust to babysit your children? And then it was like 95% Kamala Harris, So that shows you the disconnect of the two. It's like, people want to trust Trump because they think, okay, he's the one that's going to fix the economy. I trust him to fix the economy, but like, I don't trust him as far as I can throw him, as far as like, looking after my kids. Like, he's an idiot that way, so I'm not going to trust him that way. So it's just interesting to see that divide of like, I can trust that person in one way, but not trust the person in the other way.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that part too, because it's like that parallel where, like, I'm looking at the platforms of the BC NDP in British Columbia, and then I looked at the Green Party, and then I looked at the Conservative BC Conservative Party. And the BC Conservative Party had nothing in their platform for PWD at all. Like, there was no mention at all, nothing, not even one word about lifting people out of poverty, out of legislated poverty, that is. Then there was the BC NDP, who didn't say, they said the word soundbite of poverty, but there was like a reference of the federal budget, or the federal amount in July of 2025. But then there was the BC Green Party, who really went all out in their campaign, and they mentioned to lift people on income assistance and persons with disabilities out of poverty by increasing the rates up to $2,400. But I guess the question I had was at the time, which seemed kind of vague, where is it a top up to $2,400, or is that $2,400 on top of the current provincial disability benefits? Now, if that was the case, it would be over $3,000. Now, in reality, rents, alone, and now, like a one bedroom, I was just recently looking at that yesterday. $2,150 for a one bedroom. In some places you can get it for a two bedroom, but there are places that kind of run down, and so you have to kind of wonder. But again, PWD get $500 out of that allowance out of their check. They have to use the rest of the support to basically pay that market rent. And a lot of landlords now looking at that saying, no, we don't want you using your support.
Right.
And then there's another podcast that we're going to be doing in the near future, which I'm really looking forward to. So I want people to tune into that one. We're going to be talking about corporate landlords and the amount that they require you to rent at their place, that you need to show proof that you have to have X amount of dollars. And I'm not going to say yet because kind of it's a little segue, but I don't want to give it away.
I know the answer.
But they're going to require you to have so much to rent at a place that was built, in some cases, 1960s. 1960s.
I wanted to get back to, this whole thing is related, but I wanted to get back to the whole conversation about affordability versus diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know I'm kind of harping on that, but there is a reason why. And I know it might seem stupid. I realize that I'm a white guy and you're a white guy, and it's like, what are two white guys talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion? That doesn't seem right to me. And that's a fair comment, but I'll get to why I'm harping on that so much. Is that, again, if we go to the American election, so much of the election, they were talking about kind of the race divide, as far as like which race of people is going to vote for this person or this person. Like for example, they were saying, that I think Kamala has the Hispanic vote, and I think Kamala has the black vote, the person of color vote. And there's all that conversation going on, right? And again, we can draw the same parallels here in BC as well. Those kind of conversations kind of are the same. But what I wanted to get to is, I think last night proved, like, if you're looking at the American election, for everybody that thought that Kamala was going to win, the person of color vote or all that. Obviously that was proven wrong, right? Because they actually showed that actually Trump did win a lot of. I don't want to hesitate to use the word racial profiling vote, but you know what I mean.
Yes,
Like he won a lot of those votes versus Kamala, and you think, well, why is that? And I think the answer to that is very simple. It's the fact that the American people, and I'll say even the Canadian people, we're the same. Is the American people are valuing affordability way more than they are the race card. It's like they're putting a higher standard or higher value on, is my life more affordable now, or can it be if I vote for this person, versus like like it doesn't seem like the race thing is a big issue, really. I mean, it's kind of put out that way as it's an important thing, and it is. I'm not saying totally throw it out, but it just like last night proved that, you know what, this whole, and I think EB was guilty of that. Like I said, he likes to trump out the whole thing of let's stamp out hate and violence and all this kind of like discrimination. I mean, that's good. I mean, you're saying the right words. You're saying the right words, but when you actually don't back up your words with the right definition of what diversity, equity, and inclusion are, like I said, if you go back to the fact that you're forcing people onto disability, you're saying, $500 is possible for shelter. It's clearly not. So that's a pink unicorn, and you basically are. Every month, you're basically gaslighting, tens of thousands of people with disabilities. You're saying it's possible when you know it's not. And so you're gaslighting, and you're basically throwing diversity and equity and inclusion under the bus. Every month, every day the government does this, the provincial government does this, they're throwing diversity, equity, and inclusion under the bus. And I just wanted to make we always talk about the way back machine, right? Going into the way back machine,
like the time machine.
Yeah, like you and I are old enough, Brent. Like you and I are about the same age. Like I'm 56, and I don't know you're roughly the same age. I mean, if I go
1 year less,
if I go back to when I was in grade school and like elementary and high school, when we had persons of color in the classroom, we, like, for example, I had a lot of Asian. There was a lot of Asian students, for example, in the 70s and 80s. There was a lot of Asian makeup in each of the classrooms, right? But nobody cared. And I'm gonna make my like nobody was like, oh wow, like it's a huge deal that this person is Asian and and I mean, and nowadays, like, people get offended by race so much easier, like you know what I mean, like it's like there's all this kind of racial training, like are you a racist, like like people are so put off by you have to respect diversity, equity, inclusion. Like, they're all saying the right things. Like I said, they're saying the right things, but yet they're throwing it under the bus.
Yeah, I remember when I was in elementary school, I had two Asian ladies in there, and one little Asian kid there, and I used to play with them all the time. It was so much fun. It'd be they were kicking around a little soccer ball, and it was so much fun. Yeah. And of course, and we had an Asian lady, well, it's a lady now, but I mean, child, a little Asian girl back then. I'm not sure what descent, and nothing against if I get
a lot of them were either Chinese or Korean, were the two two main I would say.
Yeah, and like there was nobody got picked on. Like it was. They just treat them as another classmate.
Nobody cared. Nobody cared. No. And I say that in a good way. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like it was like nobody obsessed over it. And it seems to me now people are obsessing over the racial question, and people are obsessing over diversity, equity, inclusion. Diversity, equity, inclusion. Diversity, equity, inclusion. They say all that. And yet, like I say, they throw diversity, equity, inclusion under the bus every damn day. Every damn day. And again, like I have that example of like, forcing people with disabilities to say, yes, you can afford to find a place to rent for $500. I'm sorry, no, you can't. So again, you're throwing diversity, equity, inclusion under the bus every damn day. And every month that goes on where people with disabilities have to spend or have to, all of their PWD check, their $1,500 is all on rent. and they have like 1 to 2 or 5% left of their check because they're wasting it all on rent. If you're lucky, if you're lucky, this idea that for EB to say yes, we support diversity, equity, and inclusion. No, you don't. No, you don't. Don't lie. Don't lie. You're saying an untruth. You're saying pink unicorns. That is the truth. You're saying pink unicorns. You don't support diversity, equity, inclusion. You never have. You never have. That's the truth. You never have. The only time Canada really supported diversity, equity, and inclusion is when it was never a thing in the 70s and 80s. When, like I said, there was lots of people from China and Korea or whatever, and nobody cared. Nobody cared. And now all of a sudden, people are like diversity, equity, inclusion, and like, but everybody cares like so much, and it's like so perverted now. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if I'm going on a big rant.
No,
it's just so stupid. It's so stupid to me.
And it makes total zero sense at all, because I used to have these discussions with my mom and some of our neighbors in the neighborhood that I lived in. And I didn't know a lot about how government stuff would work back then. I didn't know about what seniors like pensions were, about disability pensions were. But I got to learn pretty quick, because one of my neighbors had just turned the eligible age to get their pension, and it was administered by the BC government. But of course, on behalf of the federal government, they have their own units there, but it's still a federal pension. But you had your BC counterparts who administered the stuff. You'd have to go in. So when I found this out, that PWD, and that was before that I was that my doctor had got me onto provincial disability benefits, after I was kicking and screaming and biting and hollering and scratching, and I said no, like this is like the work that I was doing, and I was told, well, eventually you're not going to be able to do that work any longer, Brent, so you may want to look at doing this. In the college I was going to at the time said the same thing, Brent, you might want to look at this, okay? Like your mind is saying yes, 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 and your body's saying no, you cannot do this. You've now proven to us that you academically, there's you can do courses, but the work that goes along with it, my mind kept saying, oh yeah, I can do it. And it got to a point where one of my employers I went to, I did a career move. They told me to go, like, yeah. And it was so sad, because it cost me like a lot of money for a career move at the time. My mom never let me down. She let me down on that, like, and wouldn't let it, kind of leave it alone. And I said, like, go away, like, leave the situation alone. She goes, you're not thinking, Brent. You're not thinking. Your mind is saying yes, and my body said no. And anyway, long story short was decision making based on the scenario. I figured, yeah, I had this, and it's like having a PWD. You can make better decisions if you have the financial means, saying, yeah, I can go and do this, but not giving a rate increase. It stops a person from making those proper decisions of where they want to live. Can they afford a place, or do you get trapped into where you are? It's like the situation that I was in back then. I was trapped in a situation where I worked with a friend of mine. Then I ended up working back in the industry that I had left because I did a career move, knowing that I couldn't do the job. But my mind I said, no, I did a career move. Now I'm stuck in a new city altogether, and I had no family around me, no nothing. So I kept pushing myself, and Brent, you're messing up. You're not fast enough. We need you to do all this prep work. Brent, people, and then nothing against any race. I just want to make this very clear. But one of my bosses at the time had said, Brent, people in Ethiopia, people in China, they're going to be starving if you're going to take forever, doing something. Yeah. I had tears coming down my face because I knew I couldn't go fast enough. I had hand and eye coordination. I wasn't fast enough cutting things up, and they wanted me to cut up all these vegetables, get lettuce, cut it all up, and carrots, cucumbers, you name it, tomatoes. They wanted a slicer machine. Well, I was so careful, oh God, so they got me out of there, and they said, well, here, we're going to throw you out dealing with customers. You like dealing with customers? They threw me out there. Well, then they
Yeah.
told me to be fast to memorize things.
And
But-
you know what I've noticed too, Brent, is I think there's quite a few job postings out there where the physical labor is not a component. I can't give an example, but where physical labor is not a component of the job description at all. But yet they'll put in the description must be able to lift 50 pounds.
Yeah.
Even though it has nothing to do with the job description whatsoever, for a fact you'll never be lifting any boxes at all. But they deliberately put stuff in there of must be able to lift 50 pounds so that they automatically discriminate against people with disabilities. And they're like, well, that's a requirement of the job. Sorry. When they know damn well it's not a requirement of the job, they just want to screen all the people with disabilities out.
Well, yeah, and that kind of goes with what I was going to mention is, well, I'm mentioning now, but where I'd have these discussions, like say, going back to like a guaranteed disability pension, and we've talked about that in a previous podcast where they used to be pensions, disability pensions, and I didn't understand. Well, like why people with disability can't have the kind of housing that seniors have, like when it comes to like rent geared to income. And because you have the shelter portion, apparently PWD do not qualify.
Yeah.
If you have the shelter portion, you do not qualify for subsidized housing if you are in market housing, if you pay market rent. My mom and I argued.
We could have that, but the government chooses not to.
Well, my mom and I used to argue about that. And she says, "Why don't you have that?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "I found out apparently you don't get that." So we'd go down and she'd talk to her pensioner, her worker, and the worker would say, "Well, no, unfortunately, PWD do not get that. It's in regulations." And then the worker even said it can be changed, just like that. She even said that came from the worker, just like that. She said, "One stroke of a pen or a keystroke on a computer, done."
It's all pink unicorns, Brent. The whole thing is pink unicorns. I always talk about pink unicorns all the time. You realize how much of what provincial governments do is pink unicorns. And again, this goes back to the diversity, equity, and inclusion, the whole bit, because if you say again that people with disabilities, you can afford rent at $500 a month shelter. I mean, that is a huge, massive pink unicorn. And so if you say you support diversity, equity, and inclusion, you are lying. It's a bold-faced lie. 100% lie.
I went to 18 landlords before our management companies, before we had to move to Victoria. 18, folks, 18 places. And guess what? They all said, you either had to be making a certain amount of money, and we'll be talking on another podcast about this, or the manager or the management company would say, if they didn't go with the one scenario that I'm going to be talking about in a future podcast, or they didn't want PWD to be using their support portion, to pay the rent.
Yeah.
So they said, why is the government only giving you $375? And that was $375 at the time.
Yeah.
That was that way for eons, right? And the government's had every excuse. All those magic little soundbite words.
Yeah.
Oh, it's not economically time. It's the government has to be fiscally responsible. I mean, whatever the case may be, always excuses. And I remember one of the advocates way back when had questioned the government and said, "Well, your ministers are complaining that they can't even rent for $1,000."
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. And the question was, "Oh, well, we can't rent anywhere for $1,000. Now they're getting $2,500.
Yeah.
One of them.
Yeah, I know. And I mean, so you're in that boat, Brent, where you've been turned down for places because you had landlords say, "I'm sorry, Brent, you're not making enough money.
Yeah.
I can't rent to you." I mean, that's happening a lot. So that's automatic discrimination, automatic denial a living,
Yeah.
you know, a secure place to live because the governments don't care. The provincial governments don't care. They believe in pink unicorns. They believe in pink unicorns. They say they believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion. But again, like I said, that's a lie, and I hate to keep harping on that, but it's so important.
But it's so true. It's so true.
I want to bang that drum for the whole. I mean, we're almost out at the end of the podcast, but
almost. But
I think it's just important to bang that drum.
There was a place that I went to that I was renting from in Nanaimo, British Columbia. Okay, the same company. Okay, I'm not going to say which one because I don't want the place to get bombarded with applications. But I rented from them, and before we left Nanaimo, we inquired and they had a new management group that were actually running the same building. So I went back, and I was just wondering if you had any places for rent, because your advertising said from the to, and then like from and to the amount. So what does this mean? Like, one was and the rents were like so much lower than they are now. And like, well, one's renovated and one's not renovated. Okay, but what is your source of income? Well, this is what I get from provincial disability. Oh yeah, you got to be making more than that. I mean, I guess we could rent to you, but I don't want you using your support portion. I mean, that's pretty pathetic. And this came from a management company. They said this is really pathetic amount for you to get by on. I mean, what are you going to live on? I mean, well, as long as I put a roof over my head, does it really matter? I said, as long as I pay you your rent. Well, yeah, but I want you to be able to live comfortably. And this is from the same management company that had no problem renting to us before. But when they had a new group taken over, that tells me that the rates have not been kept up. And now they're really concerned, coming from a management company, saying, well, hey, I'm sorry, but I'm probably going to move on to other applications. But I hadn't even applied, but I was more curious about what was going to happen there. Again, that's discrimination, pure discrimination from a management companies. And again, the government knew back then about raising the rates. We went to, when I say we, Sonia and myself and a whole group of other tenants and advocates, we all went to a tenancy a meeting, okay, a residential task force, they called it, back in 2018. So the government wanted input from people in the community, and they went from each community to each community and had these workshops set up. And so they would give you a stipend. So a $20 stipend for each person, and it gave you, we got free dinner. They put like a buffet on, you could help yourself. I mean, great, right? I mean, sure, that was great. But the inputs that was in there, it was all about vacancy control, rent control, about having pets in the units for people with disabilities, like guide dogs, service dogs. I mean, you name it. And the rents were already kind of going up. Like, what do we do to keep people housed rather than living in tents and being homeless? And so a lot of us all gave great ideas and suggestions, and we had little sticky pads, and they wrote down your idea, and they put up on the board, and they had it loaded down. Landlord BC was there also. They had representatives from them on the other side of the room, and they were taking notes and listening to what we were saying. And guess who the government sided with? Landlord BC.
Yeah.
They didn't go with our input, not even one input.
Yeah.
And again, like, what was the point of the matter? And now we're still years later, 2024. Now we got a rental crisis. If they would have listened to us back then, and one of them was, I said, about raising the disability rates and tying it to inflation, bringing it up above the poverty line. But again, nope, didn't want to listen. Nope. And here we are. And now the provincial government wants to wait on the federal government for something that is not even going to go to everybody. And then they're going to say, oh, there's more work to do. The government has to stay in their own lane, take care of their own residents in their own province, and take care of it. I mean, they're going to tie it to inflation. That should be number one. Have the option of having rent geared to income or increasing the rates. Lowering down property taxes is actually going to help landlords too. Just a little FYI to the government. lower property taxes down. I was talking to one of the developers who are building a brand new place like 3 doors down from here right now, and he told me the number one problem is property taxes. So you lower down the property taxes, it gives them as an incentive to actually build market housing, purpose-built rentals, and it because the building materials are so expensive right now, because there's a lot of variations that go into that mix, right? But the number one culprit is the property taxes. Mm-hmm. So you lower it down, but you give them incentive saying, okay, we'll lower your property taxes down if you actually now make a deal with them and saying, okay, rent at a market rate. Now I said, well, how about $500? He goes, what's $500? I go, well, that's what they give PWD. Okay, we're in 2024, and this guy had a really good sense of humor. He goes, we're not in the 1970s, sir. Well, so again, this is coming from a developer. He goes, I said, how much are they going to go for? He goes, I don't know if they're going to be rentals or they're going to be condominiums right now. We're just building it. There's an indication that they could be rentals because we have a lack of housing. I go, okay, so it's probably going to go for what, $3,000? Yes, your whole check, you could, 2 of you couldn't even rent here under one rent. So again, there has to be some kind of compromise with the government to work it out, because a waiting list right now for BC housing, again, it's a very long waiting list, and it's basically on individuals. If you are not in a relationship, I think it's 20
years now. I think it's 20 years.
About 20 years.
Yeah.
And there's all the red tape that's involved, and it's going to leave out a lot of people. Yeah. People want to live in the community they want to live in. They want to live in the type of housing they want to live in. Let's just work with the individual and make it as based on the individual, not household income. So we got to work together, governments and the federals. Let's work together. Let's get this done right. Let's listen to lived experience stories. Come on to the show. I invite you to come on. Let's talk about what you're going through, what people go through on a day-to-day basis in their lives. How does the U.S. economy affect your, what goes on in your life, or vice versa? Like you look at the Social Security benefits in the U.S. For PWD, versus Canada. Each province. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like it's a stark difference. Yeah. I do know that the price of housing for rentals in the United States, in a lot of the states right now, it's very expensive. Mm-hmm. So what I'm curious, and of course we'll talk to Aaron when he comes on about this, is the amount that they get on disability, is it matching what they pay for market rent? Is what I want to find out. Mm-hmm. Any guest that's actually watching right now in the United States, if you would like to come on to our show, reach out to us, and we'd love to have you on too and hear your perspective.
Well, and again, we are at the end of the podcast, so we should get off now. But I just wanted to wrap up with a comment. Like, again, the reason, like, I realize that we are Canadians, we're not Americans. So, like, why are we coming on the podcast to talk about American politics? That's one thing. So I realize that. But the other thing too is, again, like, you and I are 2 white guys, and we, surely we don't understand the fullness of what it means to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive. Because I'm not a person of color, and neither are you. And so, like, I acknowledge all of that. But I still thought today's podcast was important because, my closing comment today is, obviously, again, last night's election in the U.S. proved that people now don't care about the race card thing. Just like in the 70s and 80s, like, you and I weren't talking about, this person is from Korea, or this person is from China. Like, let's get all, like, politically correct and diverse and equity and inclusive to this person. Like, we didn't care. Care. And I think that proves now, in the States and also in Canada here, like, people are caring less and less about diversity, equity, and inclusion because they realize it's a bunch of bullshit anyway. Mm-hmm. When you say you're going to be diverse, equity, inclusive, and you actually aren't, you're actually doing the opposite. What does that actually say about diversity, equity, and inclusion when you're actually doing the exact opposite of that? You know, and you're putting all these pink unicorns and saying, yes, it's possible to get, you know, to rent a place for $500. No, it's not. Pink unicorn, you know, and it's like you're telling a lie. You're telling a lie if you're saying you're going to be diverse, equity, and inclusive by forcing people with disabilities to somehow afford, you know, rents that are $1,500 plus at $500, you know, shelter. I mean, that's pink unicorn, like I said, and it's not respecting diversity, equity, inclusion. And I say that as a white man, I realize, you know, but I think it's really important to have that reflection on what happened last night in the States and realize that no, you know, people in the States are smart. They aren't stupid. They did actually vote who they thought was the right person for the job, because I think people are sick and tired of diversity, equity, and inclusion because they know it's all a bunch of bullshit. You know, they know it's a bunch of bull, and so that's what I wanted to kind of harp on today and focus on today, and I hope people understand my point of view on that.
My thanks, Neil. My ending comments is just to summarize it all is, people voted basically on affordability.
Yeah,
they
100%.
all the cost of living, and I think they just kind of blocked out all the you know, races, like all the different races and everything else. They just looked at what's affecting their lives right now, and I think that, you know, Donald Trump had basically just said, well, you know what, yeah, I'm going to make things better, make America better. And so I think that people felt and thought, okay, well, you know, it's affecting my lives right now and their well-being. So yeah, you know, they're going to kind of go right to what he said, that narrative. And, you know, I think that kind of reflects kind of like in Canada, the same thing. It's that people just want to have a better way of life. They want to, the cost of living is skyrocketing. I don't know anyone when I've talked around in the neighborhood and talked to people just in my own bubble, and even reached out beyond that, is even people coming on to our show, you know, talk about all the time, talk about the cost of living and how it's affecting their well-being. And I mean, we have to make a choice between paying for medication versus putting food on the table, or paying your rent, or paying for your basic necessities, your toiletries. You person can only juggle stuff so much, and it gets to a point where you know, they say, well, a politician has their back, and they say, okay, well, I'm going to vote for you because you say you have my back, and then they say, oh, well, we must do better, right? Say they almost lose the election, like, you know, the NDP, they almost lost the election, right?
Yeah.
I mean, these are thin. And I remember all the comments came out during the election time. You know, I hear you. I mean, people are suffering. They're hurting right now. They're struggling. They need help now. You know, now. Well, I guess I always reflect back to that part where people need help now. And I thought, okay, well, why didn't you raise our rates during the election, before the election?
Yeah. Right.
And again, you know, of course, the results came through where we must do better. You know, so
and why are they saying that $500 shelter rate is fine?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not fine. It's not fine.
Especially when you get corporate lenders now that will say, well, look, you know, it's now getting to a point where I don't even want to rent to you because you're going to have to use your whole check. What are you going to live on now? Well, I can pay my rent. No, see, then they say, well, no, they don't want to put the tenants in a bad spot, which now I can understand that. But now you look at the subsidized housing, you got a long waiting list. So if you have someone that you know in your life, you two cannot go into subsidized housing. One of you can have a place, the other one can have a place.
Yeah, so it's built-in discrimination, right? But but the governments will say, don't call it discrimination, Neil. Don't call it discrimination. I mean, we all know it's discrimination, but they're like, don't call it discrimination. Yeah, like, you better not. But it is.
And then they wonder why so many people are living in tents, and they're living in their vehicles, or they're living on bus benches. Every morning, I'll go for a walk. The same person is sitting at the bus bench, had a sleeping bag right there. They were crashed out. They have a nice glass awning over top. They call it shelters. I don't like the word shelters because The reason why I don't like the word shelters is because it reminds me of the government with that shelter. You get rid of the word shelter, it's one check, everyone, one check, okay, out of that one component. There's a part called shelter, part called support, okay? You pay your landlord, doesn't matter how it's divided up, you pay your rent. But that word shelter is included. So the amount that they give you for your rent amount, shelter, is included in that full amount. It's not on top, it's included.
Is that part of inclusivity, Brent?
Nope, that's
diversity, equity, and inclusion.
It's called discrimination. It's total discrimination. But again, the gentleman I basically see every day, he gets up, and one day, 2 days ago, he wasn't there. I guess he got booted out sooner than I got there, but I'd see him quite a bit. And now he has nowhere else to live. He said he can't afford the high market rent. He's PWD, and the government does not give him his shelter because he doesn't have a fixed address. And so now he goes to a landlord saying, well, can you rent to me? They'll say, well, how much income do you have? So now he has to show his income less than $500 off of it.
Yeah.
And so he says, well, if you give me a place, I'll get that $500. So they say, okay, well, so this is the amount that you have left to live on? Yeah. But you get $500 more if we give you a place to live. He goes, no. They're like, no. So right again, that's like totally messed up, right? Mm-hmm. So he's going to look around for a family-sized tent where he can put in one part of his tent, he can put his heater and everything else. I said, well, you can't use propane in there, man. You're gonna have a big problem. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. Like, I don't have the solution to the homeless problem. It's very dynamic, but I do have a solution to the PWD rates. Just raise them. Yeah. Listen to the lived experience. Do the right thing. Provinces, take care of your own residents. Don't worry about the federal government.
Yeah.
Do not wait on the federal government. We waited 4.5 years. Nothing's been done. That's like saying you're going to buy a lottery ticket and, I'm guaranteed, but I got to wait until July of next year of 2025. They're going to fix it. I have all faith that they're going to fix it.
Let's be real, Brent. Let's be real, Brent. It actually, when it comes to clawbacks, it's been 30 years, three decades. It's not a matter of it's like 3 or 4 years. It's been 3 decades, 30 years of clawbacks and pink unicorns. So like this idea that we're still waiting on the provincial government after 30 years of doing the wrong thing on purpose. Let's say that again, doing the wrong thing on purpose for 30 years, but don't call it discrimination. Don't call it discrimination, Neil. Even though we're doing the wrong thing on purpose for the last 30 years, don't call it discrimination. So anyway, we got to get off or I'm going to blow my top.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in today. Hope you enjoyed the valued entertainment on the podcast. Stay tuned for more great episodes coming up soon. So I hope you enjoy your day. Please subscribe, and share the channel, and be part of the solution. Your ideas, your lived experience stories, please come on and share them with us, and give us ideas about holding the government accountable to help better your life and your well-being. Thank you. Take care, everyone.